Welcome to the HerbWorks podcast featuring Roger Drummer, the formulator at herbworks.com. An educator in the field of nutrition and Chinese herbalism, Roger has a unique ability to keep things simple by taking all the guesswork out of complicated health issues. HerbWorks is committed to helping you improve your health and enhance your life through herbs and common sense.
Roger Drummer here with another HerbWorks podcast. The topic of my talk today is coconut oil poison? Obviously, in my opinion, the answer is no, but I want to talk about this and throw out my side of the argument. And the reason I'm talking about coconut oil is because coconut oil has become very, very famous, so to speak. I mean, it's used in all kinds of recipes. The keto world has made coconut oil really popular, and it's become probably one of the most popular oils in the whole health industry, and for good reason. It's actually healthy for you, which is one of the reasons why I wanted to talk about this today. There was a article that came out. In fact, it was a YouTube video showing a lecture in Germany by a scientist who lectures at Harvard University, and in her talk, she described coconut oil as a poison. Now, let me say right off the bat that, strychnine is a poison. So coconut oil hardly qualifies as being a poison. But in reality, what she really talked about was old, outdated science that's now been proven to be all wrong. And she just keeps beating that old drum of saturated fats are bad for you. And that was the basis for her whole talk. And so this scientist, her name was Dr. Corinne Michaels, had an opinion about a lot of things in the health field. But the one that stuck out was her comment about coconut oil being poison and all saturated fats being poison, which again is all outdated information, which we're trying to change in the health field. And it's just based on old studies that have never actually been proven to be true. Now, did you know this, that it's never been proven that there's a connection between saturated fat and heart disease or saturated fat and high cholesterol? Never. It's based on some convoluted theory that no one questioned. And then we went through this phase of 40 years of not questioning this convoluted theory, which created the diabetes epidemic, which helped create the obesity epidemic, all based on a small little opinion study done by a doctor who pushed this whole idea of vegetable oils and lowering cholesterol was the answer to heart disease. Now, that's been going on now for 40 years. Now, what has happened in this country since then? Well, heart disease has gone from probably back then the number 3 killer to number 1. This is one of my favorite things I always like to bring up in the health field, was that when we invented statin drugs, which were all designed to lower cholesterol and prevent heart attacks, heart disease was the number 2 killer in America. And after approximately 30 years of $20 billion a year in sales of statin drugs, heart disease has become the number 1 killer in America. Now, something would tell me, if I was a scientist, that there's something wrong with this picture. So anyway, it's only come out recently. Well, I'll say it's only come out recently because it's only been allowed to be published recently, that they can't find a real connection between saturated fat and heart disease. Now, this was her beef with coconut oil. She claims it's mostly saturated fat. She glosses over the idea of it being half MCT oil, which is medium-chain triglycerides, which is important because your body transforms that into a type of ketone, which is a water-soluble fat that you can run your brain and your heart on, using it as an alternative source of energy. This is the whole basis of MCT oil. The whole basis of getting into ketosis with the ketogenic diet is training your body to produce high levels of ketones, using it as an alternative fuel to sugar. And so MCT oil, which is a refined version of coconut oil, allows you to take the particular oils that raise your ketones the easiest, and so it allows people who are really trying to get into medical ketosis the avenue by which to do that much easier. Now, I took advantage of that, and I was able to use that method of using MCT oil and different changes in my diet to reach medical ketosis, which I think was a huge part of my program for getting rid of my cancer. It worked for me, and it worked quite quickly. And now I'm almost exactly 2 years cancer-free. In fact, my doctor just looks at me and he just has to smile because he cannot figure out why or how I got rid of my cancer without doing anything with Western medicine. So anyway, but that's another story. Let's talk about coconut oil. So this scientist bashed coconut oil based on faulty research, based on this idea that avoiding saturated fats is actually good for your heart. Now, one of her big beefs was that coconut oil can raise your cholesterol. Now, actually, that is true. Coconut oil can raise your cholesterol, and that was the big argument with it in the beginning. But they left out a little portion of the information when they talked about that. And this is something I have personal experience with. What coconut oil normally does in your diet is raises what they call your good cholesterol, the HDL, high density lipoprotein. That's the cholesterol responsible for moving cholesterol that's not used by your body back to your liver to be processed. So it's the ongoing scientific belief and the belief in the health industry that having really good levels of HDL protects your heart. And so that is exactly what coconut oil does. It raises your HDL. Now, I went on coconut oil as an experiment. It has to be, 6-7 years ago now, when coconut oil just started getting popular. And I bought a jar of it. And I've always suffered from low cholesterol. Now, that might actually make you laugh because I said I suffered from low cholesterol. And it's true. Clear back in the 80s, I went to one of these health fairs and I had my cholesterol read and it was 100, right? And everybody thought, wow, that's amazing. Your cholesterol is 100. But then they did another blood test and showed that my liver had inflammation. So I thought that was odd. So I actually went and had it done at a doctor's office. And yes, I had liver inflammation and my cholesterol was 100. Now, everybody thought my cholesterol was just amazing, right? And so I started researching it. And back then, believe me, there wasn't a lot of places that you could research it. But I found this amazing little book called The Sugar Blues, which was published back in the 60s. And in that book, it mentioned that low cholesterol was not a desirable state of health. In fact, they had proof that if your cholesterol was below or near 100 and you were over 60, you raised your chance of having the type of stroke that is crippling by about 10 to 20%. Now, I thought, well, I didn't know much about cholesterol then, but I thought it must be good for your brain somehow. And also, even though I wasn't 60, I thought I better raise my cholesterol. So that became one of the things I tried to do for the next, 20 years, was raise my cholesterol. In that span of time, I only got it up to 125, right? So, interesting enough, when I got it measured and I had cholesterol at 100, I went and got it tested a week later after eating 84 eggs in 1 week, which was a dozen eggs a day, and my cholesterol reading was exactly the same. So it kind of showed me early on that cholesterol in your diet didn't have a huge impact on your overall cholesterol, and it depended on everything that you did, your exercise program, what you ate in your diet, how you process things, your liver health. There were so many things that were involved in whether cholesterol would go up or whether it would go down or whether it was actually unhealthy for you. So I was never able in those 20 years to get my cholesterol past 125. I ate a lot of eggs. I ate, dairy products. Typical healthy diet. I was on a very healthy diet. I was mostly vegetarian, ate tons of vegetables, lots of live food. But I did eat eggs, and I didn't shy away from having some cheese once in a while. But my cholesterol never got up over 125. So I decided to try this coconut oil out one day, and I just did my own experiment. I ate a tablespoon of oil right out of the jar every morning. Did that for way over, at least 30 days. I don't know the exact time. Had the opportunity to get my cholesterol checked again, and it went up to 160. Now, that was pretty exciting, and my HDL went up about 30 points. So my cholesterol going up to a certain point was almost exactly the amount of HDL that I increased, right? And my triglycerides were still really low, so I didn't have a problem with that. So I kept doing it, and over time, I actually, years and years later, I kept using coconut oil. And years later, when I got on the ketogenic diet, I had my cholesterol checked again. And if you're not familiar with it, the ketogenic diet does emphasize eating a lot of fat. So I was eating a lot of avocados, lots of olive oil, lots of coconut oil, added MCT oil to my diet. I didn't shy away from fat at all. I ate a lot of raw nuts. I had a high fat diet. Next time I had my cholesterol checked, it was around 220. And my doctor was really worried because when he looked at my test, he wanted me to, take a drug or do something to lower my cholesterol. But the reality is my HDL was now 100 and my LDL was around 115 to 120, something like that. So again, I didn't think anything of it. I enjoyed the fact that I finally got my cholesterol up, and this is probably news for another podcast, but in fact, I've done one on this before. But in that span of raising my cholesterol another 60 points, I also took my testosterone level up 600 points, which has not made me unhappy to know that at all. So, in case you're wondering the tie to that, cholesterol is used to make your hormones. So if your cholesterol is low or artificially lowered by a drug, then your body, it has a disrupting quality to almost all of the hormones in your body. It doesn't matter if you're a man or a woman, it's going to disrupt the production of testosterone, estrogen, progesterone, whatever it is that's a hormone. You're not going to be able to produce it the same way if you have low cholesterol.
This podcast is brought to you by HerbWorks, specializing in stress and brain essentials. Check out Roger's other articles and videos at herbworks.com. While you're there, take a look at our natural herbal-based product line for energy, stress, immunity, and sleep. Now back to Roger.
No, I'm not saying that cholesterol cannot or is not a problem in your health. It's a problem depending on a whole lot of other parameters in your health. Let's say you're someone who has diabetes and you have a real problem regulating your blood sugar. It's always elevated. Having real high cholesterol is a major problem then. And the reason is that your body cannot process or metabolize fat and sugar at the same time. This is where you really run into a problem with saturated fat, and in my opinion, why coconut oil may not be really healthy for some individuals. It depends on the rest of your diet. If your body cannot metabolize high levels of sugar and fat at the same time, one of them stays in your bloodstream and never gets processed. And then that causes inflammation and it causes all kinds of damage, especially when it oxidizes. if you don't have the right level of antioxidants in your system to actually bind with these substances and to keep it from oxidizing, it's no different than leaving the jar of oil on your counter open for 3 months. It's going to go rancid. And so this is where you run into a problem. So if let's say you're a typical guy who once in a while just reads something about health and you decide, hey, coconut oil is good for me, I'm going to take it every day. Okay, and so you end up eating a tablespoon of coconut oil and you still keep eating at the fast food restaurant twice a day. You never really eat any live food. You just basically eat a standard American diet. Well, you've probably just added to your misery, because your body cannot process all that sugar and fat, and you just added some more saturated fat to it. That's the same guy that's going to have a problem eating the fat off a steak or eating bacon or eating all these other things, because his body is in a state of poor metabolism anyway. It cannot metabolize the sugar that he's eating. He's probably pre-diabetic, and in that pre-diabetic state, that means that your blood sugar is always elevated to a state to where you're just below being a diabetic, but it cannot regulate itself. So you're always being exposed to excessive amounts of inflammation that your body is trying to repair. And it can't, because you're exposed every day to high levels of sugar, high levels of insulin, and high levels of fat, because you can't clear any of it out. So if you're going to go on a diet to where you really want to add great fats to your diet and clean your diet up, you have to go on a low-carb diet. You have to get all your carbohydrates from vegetables and not from processed foods like breads, pastas, white flours, any type of grain. And when you switch that over and your body regulates its own sugar to where it's in a normal or what they now considered a really good range, around 80 to 90, then you can process fat quite easily. And then that becomes a health food, because your body does utilize those oils for a lot of different things. This is why I often tell people that there's not really a problem with cholesterol in and of itself. It's the whole environment in your system, because cholesterol is there to do something. It's there to fix something. This is why your body makes cholesterol, and it doesn't depend on your diet to actually have it. Your body will make a certain amount of cholesterol. In fact, they claim 80% of the cholesterol in your system is manufactured by your liver. And why is that? Because if you're experiencing cellular damage, you have to produce cholesterol and send it out, because it's used in the making and repairing of cellular membranes. So if you have a diet that's always high in sugar and your body's not able to regulate that through normal insulin release, so you become insulin resistant or pre-diabetic, then you're exposed to these two inflammatory chemicals that are causing excessive inflammation in your arteries, and then your liver and your body's going to react to that by producing more cholesterol. And so you're adding a little bit of fuel to the fire, because you can't process the cholesterol you're making either, usually because you have low HDL and because it's just another fat that's getting mixed up with all the bad fats that you're probably consuming. And I say that because if you're a typical person eating a standard American diet, most of the fats in your diet come from processed or hydrogenated oils that have been fried at a high heat, and just oils that are really processed in a way which is usually called, hydrogenated, but they're also vegetable oils, which are high in polyunsaturated fats, which tend to raise inflammation and actually give you heart attacks. This is the whole problem with the theory on saturated fat, vegetable oils, and protecting your heart. They went on this theory of switching over from butter and saturated fat. Most people used to use lard. They went on this idea, we'll switch to vegetable oils like corn oil and soy oil, and because those things show that it lowers your cholesterol. Yes, it does. It lowers your cholesterol. But in every study they've ever done on the people where they had their cholesterol lowered, they ended up having more heart attacks. So what was the point? And you actually probably think I'm kidding about that, but no, it's true. The people in the studies, whenever they did studies that lowered someone's cholesterol using polyunsaturated oils, and they compared them to another group that was eating saturated fat, the group on the polyunsaturated oils always had more heart attacks. In fact, there was a famous study. Let me see if I can remember what that study was. There was a famous study that, oh God, what was it called? Was it the Pure study or the Predimed? Oh yeah, it was Predimed study. There was a Predimed study. Odd name, but there was two studies. One was the Pure study, one was the Predimed study. In that study, they had 7,000 people in it, and they were comparing olive oil versus a low-fat diet. Now, just in case you didn't know, I didn't know this for a long time myself, actually. Dr. Hyman, if you're not familiar with him, writes excellent books, by the way, on fat and heart disease and regulating your blood sugar. And he has amazing information on fat and its health benefits. But he was talking on one of his talks about a study called the Predimed, and they had 7,000 participants in that study. Olive oil versus low-fat diet. Olive oil has 20% saturated fat. I didn't know that. I learned that from Dr. Hyman. And so in that study, they compared the heart health between these two groups. So they divided it right in half. And what they found was that they actually had to stop the study after a period of time because the people in the low-fat section of the study were dying of heart disease. So they just stopped it, right? There was another study which is always considered to be one of the greatest studies ever done on heart health. In fact, it was done originally by the researcher who practically ruined the entire world of health by coming up with a theory of polyunsaturated fat and saturated fat, and the whole medical industry followed this advice for 40 years and just killed millions of people. But anyway, he did a study with 9,000 people in a mental institution, in mental hospitals all over Minnesota. And he gave one group saturated fat and butter with all their meals, and the other group did corn oil as their fat. And what they found was that corn oil did lower their cholesterol. In fact, for every 30-point drop in LDL cholesterol, they did notice that you had a 22% increase in the amount of heart attacks in the group. And they literally had very little heart disease in the saturated fat group. So, and I mean, that's an amazing statistic. Think about that. 22% increase in heart attacks after lowering your cholesterol 30 points. Does that give you an idea that there's maybe something going on with heart attacks other than cholesterol? It's part of the landscape. You know, we talk about this in Chinese herbology all the time. It's the landscape. It's the overall picture of everything that's going on. And this is why Chinese medicine seems so vague to most people, because they'll go in and think they have a problem with one little thing in their body. And in Chinese medicine, they just look at your whole system, see what part is imbalanced, correct it, and the body usually takes care of itself. This is why you might go to an acupuncturist 6 or 7 times to take care of your problem instead of just popping a pill and not noticing your symptom, because they're correcting a pattern that your body has fallen into for a long period of time. And so they had another review study, and by review I mean they just looked at a composite of scientific studies done on people consuming butter, right? Now, that's kind of fascinating to me just to know that they studied people that ate butter. Anyway, they came up with these studies that covered, get this, 615 million patient years. In other words, they had enough people in these studies for a long enough period of time that when they calculated all the years that belonged to all these people, it came out to 615 million years of eating butter. I just like the sound of that. 615 million years of eating butter. Anyway, showed no increase in incidences of heart disease. None. But you know what they did show? They showed a decrease in the incidence of type 2 diabetes from eating butter. I don't know about you, but when I get done with this podcast, I'm going to have some butter. But it's just amazing to me that people like this German scientist who, obviously people pay attention to her because she's lectures at Harvard. She's a scientist. She's obviously lecturing around the world. But you know what? This really points out the fact, more than likely, she's on the payroll of a lot of different places. And probably, I'm just going to guess, I don't know, I haven't looked up her background. I'm going to guess that she's on the payroll of some pharmaceutical and food companies. And that may influence the way that she looks at all these things. And why do I say that? Because I remember back, 5-6 years ago, there was this issue at Harvard University when a medical student there was attending a lecture on heart disease, and all the professor did was lecture about giving people statin drugs. And he raised his hand and asked why he wasn't teaching about some advice on their diet that they might want to do for their heart. And he got ridiculed in front of the class, which made him mad. And he started investigating professors and teachers at Harvard University. And he ended up forming something called the Student AMA, which was there to protect the rights of medical students. But what he found out was that there was over 1,800 different employees at Harvard that were on the payroll of pharmaceutical companies. In fact, when they complained to the president of the school, he laughed at them. He says, well, they own every lab in this entire university. And if we got rid of them, we wouldn't have medical buildings. We wouldn't have medical labs. We wouldn't have anything. Now, when you think about that and you wonder why there might be a problem with modern medicine, that basically is the problem with modern medicine. The companies that make drugs are basically responsible for training all the doctors that we have in this country. There, I said it. But anyway, back to coconut oil. With my own personal experience and the experience of many other people, coconut oil is completely different, by the way, than what coconut oil was 40 years ago. Coconut oil 40 years ago was usually sold as a suntan lotion, and there was only very few parts of the world that actually used it as a oil to cook with. In fact, I remember being in Jamaica back in 1979, and I bought a quart bottle of coconut oil for $1, and I bought it to use as suntan lotion while I was down there, and it was kind of yellow. It was this liquid yellow thing in a glass whiskey bottle, actually. And so it's nothing compared to the cold-pressed, extra virgin coconut oil that I consume today, which is not it just goes through very, very little processing and is almost probably considered to be a live food. It's an incredible substance compared to what, I had back in 1979. But again, I was using it for suntan lotion, and it actually works really well. So, but the reality is that a lot of research is just like that old coconut oil. It's based on just bad information. It's just based on years and years of getting poor information that nobody did anything about because they just figured that basic information was a settled scientific fact, and so we all just blindly followed that wrong scientific fact, and we ended up killing millions of people. Literally, we killed millions of people. We created the obesity epidemic. We created the probably the diabetes epidemic, the high blood pressure epidemic. All these things are related to the overconsumption of sugar and processed oils that create incredible inflammation. And when you combine the two, all the extra inflammation you get from cooking oils and sugar that your body can't process because you have a metabolic disease, then you are just ripe for inflammation. I know people search all over the internet for herbs that are anti-inflammatory, herbs that get rid of inflammation. The reality is almost every single herb known to man has some anti-inflammatory properties. If you're consuming a really good herb program, you're probably having an effect on your inflammation. But you're not going to be able to get rid of your inflammation if you're continuously consuming a lot of sugar and consuming a lot of foods that use processed hydrogenated oils, because it's kind of like pouring gasoline on a fire. It just keeps raging on and raging on. It doesn't matter if you throw a cup of water on it once in a while. You have to change your diet. You have to do all the things that you need to do to actually get healthy and to change your inner environment. And when you do that, coconut oil can be an amazing addition to your diet. In fact, I celebrated reading that article about Dr. Corinne Michaels by going down in my kitchen and having a tablespoon of coconut oil. So that was my little silent protest. I love the stuff, and I am going in for my yearly 15 different blood tests here in a week or two. And I think because of this podcast, I'm going to do a podcast where I just go over all my own blood tests and let you know how all my numbers have come out, because I am a person who consumes a lot of coconut oil and consumes MCT oil and a lot of olive oil and a lot of nuts and a lot of avocados. So I am a fat bomb in my diet. And so I want to see how that all comes out this year for my big yearly test. But I'm going to wrap this up, the whole talk here on coconut oil. And before I do, though, I want to throw one other thing in here. Allow me to throw one other thing in here. She went on to bag on almost everything you can think of in the health industry. It wasn't just coconut oil. But what was fascinating about that was that she took pot shots at a lot of things. And like a lot of other things, she was actually right, or partially right, on a lot of it. But in the entire context of it, she was mostly wrong. And this is the problem with the health industry today, is that you can demonize almost anything in the health industry if you pull out one little fact about it and ignore all the other information about it. Like, she really got into this tangent about superfoods and how acai and maqui berry and goji berries and all these other things are not superfoods. And they're terrible for you and you're wasting your money. Now, in reality, she's got a bit of truth there. The funny thing about all these superfoods, which I find fascinating, is that there's just as powerful superfoods growing in your own country that people just don't realize they're superfoods. If someone discovered a dark sour cherry in a faraway island next week and brought it to America and put it in an antioxidant drink and sold it in network marketing, it'd be the biggest hit in the world. They could claim curing arthritis, rheumatoid arthritis, joint pain, inflammation all over the body. This amazing superfruit. Yeah, you can get it down at any grocery store. It's in the freezer section if it's not fresh. Just amazing anti-inflammatory, right? Same way with raspberries, black raspberries. Black raspberries have been shown to work better on esophageal cancer than chemotherapy. There's all these superfoods growing, so she does have a point, but that doesn't mean that those foods aren't amazing, and that if you have some of it and add a little bit to your protein shake or to one of your drinks every day, that it doesn't have health benefits, because it does. The problem with those superfoods is where people think that if I consume $200 worth of it and, 5 times the amount every single day, I will become super healthy. No, it doesn't usually work that way. You still have to look at what's actually in your diet. and how you can repair or balance it in response. You have to balance how your body's responding to your diet, and that'll be the greatest increase in your health. Now, another thing that was really funny was that she bagged on nuts. She said nuts are good for you, but if you eat too many of them, you'll get fat, and that's bad for your health. Okay, that's kind of common sense information. I don't know if you had to be a scientist to know that. I know that if I eat a couple handfuls of nuts every day, they're really good for me, but if I eat a pound, I get kind of paunchy and I get fat. So that wasn't great news. The one thing that she did mention, which I have a problem with, and then I'll wrap this talk up, was that she bagged on people who went on a gluten-free diet. Now, her idea was that if you're not tested to find out that you have a gluten sensitivity, then it makes no sense at all to ever worry about gluten. Now, I have a problem with that. I don't eat gluten myself because I must have had a sensitivity because I went off of it and got rid of an incredible amount of joint pain. And so I've just continued to stay off of it because I obviously had a problem with it. My joints don't hurt anymore. And so my whole thought on that, though, is that gluten has been scientifically proven. And by the way, at Harvard, just another school that she talks at, has proven that consuming gluten causes the cells of your intestines to separate and allow undigested food particles to go into your body. So if you have any inflammation at all, you would probably benefit from just stopping gluten for a while. And then if you introduce it again, to not eat it every single day, but allow your body to have regular periods to heal from it. It's claimed that your digestive system can heal itself within 3 to 4 days after exposure to gluten. And I personally feel if you only consume fermented gluten, meaning real sourdough bread, it probably won't affect you much at all. But you have to do your own experiments on that. But the reality is that a lot of people benefit from going on gluten-free diets. It allows their digestive system to heal, and it allows them to get rid of inflammation. So it's not a bad thing. What's a bad thing is rushing out and thinking that you're now going to just buy gluten-free cookies and gluten-free this and gluten-free that and eat all this junk and ruin your blood sugar even worse than it was before. That's the problem with it. Trying to replace something that was bad with something that's probably worse. So you have to, be smart about what you replace it with. So I'm going to stop there and wrap up my talk on coconut oil today. And just want to thank you all for tuning in. This has been Roger Drummer with another HerbWorks podcast. And if you like this type of information, you can find me at herbworks.com.